The twisted metal of the car groaned as I tried to move, but my body refused to obey. Pain exploded through my ribs, and my vision blurred with the blood dripping from my forehead. The air was thick with the sharp scent of gasoline, making it hard to breathe. I forced my eyes open, and through the cracks in my blood-stained vision, I saw them. Standing just a few steps away, arms linked together, were the two people I trusted the most, my husband, William, and the girl I had raised like a sister, Isabel. A wave of pain, far greater than my physical wounds, tore through my chest. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to curse them for what they had done to me. But all that came out was a ragged cough, blood splattering onto my trembling hands. My phone lay shattered a few feet away, its screen flickering, flashing the last thing I had seen before the impact, the evidence. A series of bank transactions showed how they had transferred my compan. Wise assets right under my nose. I had spent 15 years protecting that company, fighting against competitors, handling shareholders, and making strategic moves to secure our future. I had given my life to it. And yet, in the end, I wasn't defeated by my enemies, I was betrayed by the people I loved the most. Sister Lee, one must be ruthless in doing things. Isabel's voice was calm, almost amused. She bent down and whispered in my ear, her breath warm against my skin. That's the lesson you taught me. But you see, everything I have now, I earned it with my own abilities. Her words sliced through me like a knife. I had raised this girl, given her everything, education, wealth, a future. And this was how she repaid me? The darkness at the edges of my vision thickened. My body was failing. The gasoline smell was growing stronger, the flames licking at the wreckage. This was the end. Just before my consciousness faded, my last thought was a desperate wish, if on I could go back. If only I could change everything. The sound of a phone notification pulled me from the abyss. I gasped, my lungs burning as I shot up in bed, my heart hammering against my chest. I was alive? Frantically, I looked around. I wasn't in the wreckage. I wasn't bleeding. Instead, I was sitting in my office, my phone in my hands. My fingers trembled as I looked at the message on the screen. Hello, General Manager Luna. This is the student with the most difficult living conditions in our school. If you can sponsor her, her mother will surely be grateful to you. At the bottom were two photos. A little girl dressed in rags stood in front of a worn-out school gate. Her hair, withered and dry, was tied loosely behind her head. Her big, pitiful eyes stared at the camera. My breath hitched. I knew this photo. I had seen it before, 15 years ago. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. I had gone back in time. The accident, the betrayal, the heartbreak, it hadn't happened yet. I was 20 again. Tears burn. My eyes, but I wiped them away, my hands shaking. This was my chance. A chance to fix everything. A chance to stop the betrayal before it could even begin. I had 15 years before that fateful day. And this time, I would not make the same mistake. 15 years ago, when I first saw these photos, I felt overwhelming pity. I had immediately transferred a large sum of money and sent someone to bring the little girl to me. That little girl was Isabel. I gave her a home, an education, and all the love I could offer. And she had stabbed me in the back. But now, I knew the truth. Isabel had never been the poorest student. I had been deceived. Teacher Daniel, the person who had recommended her, had lied to me. Isabel's family had been one of the wealthiest in her village, yet she was chosen for sponsorship. And the real poor child, the one who actually needed help, had been ignored. I clenched my phone tightly. My heart pounded as I made my first real change. I'm sorry, Teacher Daniel. I've been busy. I'll get back to you later. Then, without hesitation, I called my assistant. Book me a plane ticket to Zhejiang County. As soon as possible. This time, I would find out the truth. The flight was short, but the journey was long. After landing, I took a taxi to the countryside. The roads became rougher, and eventually, the car could go no further. A kind old woman, carrying baskets of vegetables, offered us a ride on her donkey cart. I accepted, feeling an odd sense of déjà vu. When we reached the village, the sight of the small school filled me with an odd mixture of nostalgia and dread. The fence at the school gate was broken, creaking as the wind blew against it. Then, I saw her. In the middle of a group of children, wearing a clean yellow coat and standing proudly, was Isabel. My breath caught in my throat. She was completely different from the pitiful girl in the photo. While the other children wore ragged clothes, she stood out, her posture confident, her expression smug. And then, I saw something even more shocking. A small girl sat in the corner, alone, her head bowed, her tiny hands clutching a torn pink coat. The same coat from the photo. The real girl I was supposed to help. The children were whispering, sneering at her. She smells bad. Stay away from her. She has no friends. No wonder no one picked her. Isabel is going to the big city soon. She doesn't need to play with dirty kids like her. My blood boiled. I had lived a lifetime believing Isabel was a poor, innocent child. But this was the real story. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. Stop. The playground fell silent. All eyes turned to me. I walked straight to the little girl in the corner and kneeled in front of her. Her name was Daphne. She flinched as I reached out, her eyes filled with fear. I stink, she whispered, as if she had already accepted that she was unwanted. My heart shattered. I turned to the group of children and finally locked eyes with Isabel. Her innocent, wide-eyed expression was fake. I could see it now. I looked back at Daphne, my mind already made up. This time, I wouldn't choose the wrong person. I turned to Teacher Daniel, my voice cold and firm. I haven't made my decision yet. But I will soon. And this time, no one would deceive me. The entire playground had fallen silent. Dozens of little eyes were fixed on me, but I was only focused on two people, Isabel, standing proudly in her clean clothes, and Daphne, cowering in the corner, clutching her tattered coat. Daphne was the real girl in need. Isabel had taken her place. In my previous life, I had unknowingly given my love, trust, and wealth to the wrong person. But now, armed with the knowledge of betrayal, I wouldn't make the same mistake again. I turned to Teacher Daniel, the woman who had first introduced me to Isabel all those years ago. She had a nervous smile on her face, but I could see the unease in her eyes. I haven't made my decision yet, I repeated, keeping my voice steady. Not this time, Daniel. Not again. Teacher Daniel's plump figure shifted uncomfortably. She forced a laugh, brushing her hands against her worn-out skirt as if trying to wipe away invisible dust. Oh, General Manager Luna, you don't need to trouble yourself. Isabel is the most suitable child for sponsorship. She's bright, well-mannered, and hardworking. She will do great GS in the future. She gestured toward Isabel, who immediately put on a pitiful face, her big, clear eyes blinking innocently. Big sister, Isabel said softly, I'm so happy you're here. I promise to study hard if you take me with you. It was the same voice, the same tone, the same act she had played in my last life. But this time, I wasn't fooled. I kept my face neutral. I turned back to Daphne, whose small fingers were trembling as she clutched the hem of her coat. She hadn't moved an inch, almost as if she expected me to ignore her. I kneeled in front of her, lowering my voice. Daphne, tell me the truth. Did Teacher Daniel ask you to give this coat to Isabel? The little girl stiffened. Her lips quivered, and she hesitated. But then, with a small, determined voice, she whispered. Yes. She said I had to. My chest burned. I turn. Ed to Teacher Daniel, my expression cold. Why did you lie to me? Her eyes widened in fake shock. Lie? Oh, General Manager Luna, you must have misunderstood. Enough. My voice was sharp, cutting through her excuses. Isabel is not the poorest child here. She was never the poorest child. So why was she chosen? Where is the real child who needed help? Teacher Daniel froze. Isabel's small hands clenched into fists, but she kept her face blank. Silence stretched between us. The children, sensing something was wrong, huddled together, whispering. I knew they were hiding something. Before Teacher Daniel could find another excuse, I stood up. Isabel, I called, my voice eerily calm. Who is Daphne? She flinched. But then, she quickly composed herself, putting on a confused face. I don't know her very well, she said, biting her lip. She's just a classmate. We never talk. Lie. A child beside her snickered, too young to understand what was happening. That's not true, Isabel. You told us to stay away from her. Ah. So even at this young age, Isabel was already playing her games. Before she could defend herself, I turned to Daphne again. Do you want to come with me? Her small body trembled. She gripped her coat tightly, her only piece of warmth. She was afraid. Afraid of me, afraid of trusting, afraid of being disappointed again. I softened my voice. You don't have to be scared. I want to help you, Daphne. Not just today, but forever. You don't have to live like this anymore. Her eyes flickered with hope, but just as quickly, she cast her gaze downward, biting her lip. Teacher Daniel won't let me go, she whispered. I turned sharply to the teacher. Is that so? Teacher Daniel visibly paled. Oh, of course not. I was just worried for her mother. Then let's talk to her mother right now. Checkmate. She was trapped. Her hesitation told me everything. Gee, they never wanted Daphne to leave. I sent my bodyguard to ask around the village for Daphne's mother. Meanwhile, I stood my ground, making it clear that I wasn't leaving without answers. 10 minutes later, my bodyguard returned with a strange expression. General Manager Luna. There's a problem. My stomach dropped. What is it? He hesitated before answering. Daphne's mother passed away. The air around me turned ice cold. I turned to Daphne, who was looking at the ground, her shoulders hunched. Daphne. Is that true? She nodded slowly. It happened a long time ago. My heart ached. The realization hit me hard. This little girl had been alone for so long. And yet, the village had done nothing for her. No wonder the children treated her badly. No wonder she flinched at kindness. Then why is she still here? I asked, looking around. She has no family. Who is taking care of her? Silence. Nobody spoke. The villagers were watching from a distance, avoiding my gaze. Something was very wrong. G here. The village chief, my bodyguard, finally answered. He's the one keeping her here. The village chief? I frowned. Why would the village chief care about an orphaned girl? Unless he was hiding something. I clenched my fists. Now, I had to know. A high-pitched scream suddenly cut through the tense air. You can't take her. She belongs here. It was Isabel. Her eyes were wild, and for the first time, she wasn't pretending anymore. She ran toward Daphne and grabbed her by the arm, her nails digging into the little girl's skin. You have no right to leave. My blood boiled. I ripped Isabel away, shoving her back. She is not yours to control. Daphne was shaking. Isabel's face twisted in rage, an expression she had never shown me before in my past life. I was supposed to be the one. She screamed. Not her. Me. There it was. The real Isabel. Not the innocent girl I had once believed in. Not my so-called sister. I stepped between her and Daphne. You took her place once, Isabel. But not this time. Her face darkened, but I didn't care anymore. I grabbed Daphne's hand, holding it tightly. Daphne, you're coming with me. She looked up at me, her wide eyes filled with disbelief. Really? She whispered. I nodded. Yes. I promise, I won't ever let anyone hurt you again. Tears welled up in her big brown eyes. For the first time, she smiled. Isabel watched us, her face twisted in pure hatred. And at that moment, I knew I had made my first enemy in this new life. But I didn't care. Because this time, I was ready. Daphne's small hand trembled in mine as I led her away from the schoolyard. I could feel the eyes of the villagers on us, whispers rising like an eerie chorus behind my back. But I didn't stop. I had made my choice. Daphne was coming with me. Behind me, Isabel seethed with silent rage. Her once perfect mask had cracked, revealing the bitterness and resentment she had been hiding beneath her innocent act. She had been so sure that she had one. That history would repeat itself, that I would choose her again. But this time, I saw the truth. As we walked toward the center of the village, a crowd started to form. Mothers carrying baskets of vegetables stopped in their tracks, whispering to each other. Elderly men, seated on wooden benches outside their homes, watched in silence, their expressions unreadable. Then, from the crowd, a tall, broad-shouldered man stepped forward. The village chief. His weathered face was filled with forced kindness, but his eyes were sharp and calculating. Miss Luna, I heard you were visiting. What a surprise. I didn't smile. Yes. I came to see the children. And now, I've made a decision. The village chief's eyes flickered toward Daphne, who clung tightly to my sleeve. Oh, he said slowly. And what decision would that be? I didn't hesitate. Daphne will be coming with me. I will sponsor her education and ensure she has a better future. The air grew thick with tension. A few villagers shifted uncomfortably, casting quick glances at the chief. Some looked relieved. Others looked afraid. The chief's forced smile faltered for just a moment before he regained control. "That's very generous of you, Miss Luna," he said. "But Daphne belongs here." I felt Daphne flinch beside me. I gritted my teeth. She has no family left. What reason is there for her to stay? The village chief tilted his head, his expression calm, but there was something dangerous in his gaze. "There are many orphans in the world, Miss Luna. But taking them away from their home, that's not always the best solution." A murmur swept through the crowd, as if he had made some profound point. I could see his game. He was trying to turn this into a moral debate. Trying to make it seem like I was the outsider interfering in their lives. I wouldn't let him. "Daphne's father was a policeman," I said, watching him closely. "He died in the line of duty." A flicker of something, unease? Annoyance crossed the chief's face. "Yes," he said slowly. "It was a tragic event. The entire village mourned his loss. And yet," I continued, "he left behind a pension. A pension that should have gone to Daphne." The villagers fell silent. The chief's expression hardened. "I don't know what you're talking about." I pulled out my phone, tapping the screen. "I had an investigator look into it." I turned the screen toward him, showing a document, official records of the pension money. The money was supposed to be given to Daphne. Instead, it was transferred to the village funds. But from what I hear, Daphne has never received a single yuan from it. Murmurs of shock and confusion rippled through the villagers. "Is this true?" one old woman whispered. "I thought that money was meant for the child." The village chief's friendly mask finally cracked. "Miss Lewin." He said in a low voice, "you are an outsider. You don't understand how things work here." I didn't back down. "Oh, I understand perfectly." I took a step closer. "You stole from a little girl. And now that she has a way out, you don't want to let her go." His jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists. For the first time, he looked nervous. Through all of this, Daphne had remained silent. But now, she slowly lifted her head. Her small voice cut through the air. Did my father's EY really exist?" The village chief didn't answer. Daphne's tiny hands balled into fists. "All this time, I thought I was a burden. I thought I was worthless." She looked up at the village chief, her dark eyes filled with quiet fury. "But you just didn't want me to know." The village chief stiffened. "Daphne, don't be ungrateful," he snapped. "The village has taken care of you. You never took care of me." Daphne shouted, her voice breaking. "You took care of Isabel. You took care of her family. You gave them everything while I had nothing." The villagers were watching closely now. The whispers grew louder, suspicion growing in their eyes. Why was Isabel the one chosen? Why did we never see Daphne get anything? What happened to the money? The village chief looked trapped. I knew then, I had one. I bent down, meeting Daphne's gaze. "Daphne, do you want to leave?" She nodded. "Yes." "Then let's go." I took one step forward. And the village chief snapped. "You can't take her." He grabbed Daphne's arm roughly, making her yelp in pain. My bodyguard moved instantly, grabbing the chief's wrist and twisting it away from the child. Touch her again, I said coldly, and you'll regret it. The village chief gasped, glaring at me, but he said nothing. I turned to the villagers. This village has been deceived for years. I pointed at the chief. He took money that didn't belong to him. He let a child suffer. And now, he wants to keep her here, not because he cares, but because he's afraid of what she might expose. Gasps. Shock. The villagers were finally starting to understand. I turned back to the chief. If you try to stop me, I'll take this to the authorities. His face drained. Ed of color. I knew what he was thinking. If this went public, he would lose everything. Fine, he spat. Take her. A cheerful, mocking voice suddenly rang out. Oh no, dear chief, this is just the beginning. I turned toward the voice. Isabel. She stood near the school fence, her arms crossed, a smirk on her face. You think you won, Sister Luna? She asked, tilting her head. Just wait. I narrowed my eyes. She wasn't done yet. And neither was I. We'll see, Isabel. I took Daphne's hand. And together, we left the village. The dusty roads of Shampoo Village stretched behind us as we walked toward the car waiting at the outskirts. Daphne's tiny fingers clenched my hand tightly, her grip firm despite her small frame. She didn't look back. Neither did I. I knew the villagers were still standing there, watching. Some in shock, some in anger, and some in guilt. But one pair of eyes burned with fury, Isabel's. I didn't need to see her face to know she wasn't going to accept this. But it didn't matter. Daphne was mine to protect now. Miss Luna, my bodyguard murmured as he opened the car door, should I arrange security? The village chief didn't seem like the type to let things go easily. I glanced at the path behind us, the small village where secrets had festered for years. The village chief was afraid, not just because I had taken Daphne, but because I had exposed the truth. And people like him? They didn't stay silent for long. Do it, I said. And keep an eye on Isabel, too. The bodyguard nodded and stepped away to make a call. I turned back to Daphne, who was staring at her hands, deep in thought. Daphne? I called softly. She looked up, her big, dark eyes uncertain. Sister Lewin. She said hesitantly, is it really okay for me to go with you? I frowned. Of course. Why would you ask that? She bit her lip, her fingers gripping the hem of her tattered coat. The village chief always said I was a burden. That no one would want me. My stomach twisted. I had seen cruelty in the business world, seen greedy men steal fortunes, seen betrayals at the highest level. But this? Telling a child she was unwanted just to keep control over her? I hated them. I reached out, gently lifting Daphne's chin so she looked me in the eyes. Listen to me, I said firmly. You are not a burden. You are not worthless. And you don't belong to anyone but yourself. Her eyes widened. If you want to go back, I won't stop you. But if you want a new life, if you want a real chance, I smiled softly. Then come with me. For a moment, she just stared at me, her face unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. I want to go with you. The drive back to City A was long. Daphne stayed quiet, occasionally looking out the window in awe as the roads grew wider, the buildings taller, and the world she had never seen before unfolded before her eyes. When we finally pulled up to my house, Her eyes went wide. Is this your house? She didn't say it with excitement. She said it with fear. I knew why. To her, this wasn't just a house, it was a whole different world. She had spent years being treated like nothing, told she wasn't worth even a warm quilt at night. And now, she was stepping into a place so grand it probably felt unreal. I crouched down beside her, offering my hand. Come on, I said gently. It's home now. She hesitated, then slowly placed her small hand in mine. Together, we walked inside. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was tired. Not because I was restless. But because my mind kept going back to Isabel. Just wait. Her words from earlier rang in my ears. She wasn't going to let this go. And I wasn't naive. She had spent years pretending to be the perfect little sister, all while stealing from me. She had gone as far as to arrange my murder in the past. Would she really stop now? I had changed the story this time. I had stolen her place. And now, she was going to try to take it back. My phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. I frowned and picked it up. Hello? For a moment, there was silence. Then, a familiar voice. Miss Luna, the man on the other end said smoothly. I think we should talk. William. I went completely still. William. I heard you've been busy. There was a mocking lilt in his voice, the same tone he had always used when he thought he had the upper hand. I clenched my jaw. What do you want? A low chuckle. Nothing much. Just to congratulate you. I could hear the smile in his voice. You finally made your choice. But are you sure you chose correctly? My fingers tightened around the phone. He was playing games. He was warning me. I didn't let my voice waver. I never choose wrong. Another chuckle. We'll see. Then the line went dead. I sat there for a moment, staring at my phone. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with rage. William and Isabel had always worked together. I had just torn apart their plan. And now? They were going to come for me. I took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. Let them try. I wasn't the same person from before. I had already died once. And I wasn't going to lose again. The next morning, Daphne stepped out of her room, looking nervous. She was wearing a new outfit, a simple, warm sweater and a skirt, nothing fancy. But to her, it must have felt like gold. She clutched the hem of her sleeves, hesitating. Sister Luna, is it really okay for me to wear this? I sighed, walking over and tugging lightly at the sweater's collar. You look great. She smiled, but it was small. Today, I said, we go to your EW school. Her smile faded. Do I have to go? I knelt down in front of her. Daphne, you're smart. You're strong. You deserve this chance. She was silent. Then, finally, she nodded. Okay. As I walked her out the door, I felt something shift in my heart. Daphne wasn't just a responsibility. She was family. I had saved her. And I would never let anyone hurt her again. Even if it meant destroying Isabel and William once and for all. Daphne held my hand tightly as we walked into the grand entrance of City A's most prestigious private school. Her grip was firm, but I could feel the sweat on her palm. She was nervous. I didn't blame her. This school was worlds apart from the broken-down classroom she had spent years in. Students in neat uniforms strolled through the bright hallways, some chatting, some rushing to class. Everything smelled of fresh books and polished wood. Daphne, in her new sweater and skirt, looked down at her shoes, shuffling slightly. I don't belong here. Her voice was small. I stopped walking and knelt down so we were eye level. Daphne, look at me. She hesitated, then lifted her eyes. You belong anywhere you choose to be. Her brows furrowed, like she didn't believe me. I squeezed her hand. The only thing stopping you is yourself. She bit her lip. Then, slowly, she nodded. I smiled. Come on. Let's get you settled in. The school principal, Mr. Evans, was a polite older man with silver hair and round glasses. He shook my hand firmly. Miss Luna, welcome. I've read about your company's contributions. It's an honor to have you here. Thank you, Principal Evans. I trust that Daphne will receive the best education here? He smiled warmly. Of course. We'll ensure she catches up to the curriculum and receives any extra help she needs. Daphne sat quietly beside me, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked calm. But I could see the way her fingers clenched slightly, betraying her nervousness. The principal reached for the student file on his desk. Let me get her class schedule and assign a mentor student to guide her for the first week. The door swung open. Sorry for being late, Principal. A boy walked in. He was tall, with a confident stride and sharp, intelligent eyes. But the moment he saw me, he froze. And so did I. William. It wasn't him. But it looked like him. The same arrogant stance. The same deep brown eyes. But this boy, he was younger. Then it clicked. This wasn't William. It was his brother. The principal introduced him proudly. This is Nathaniel Kingsley, one of our brightest students. He'll be Daphne's mentor for the week. Nathaniel's expression changed when he heard Daphne's name. He glanced at me, his eyes narrowing slightly. Miss Luna, he said smoothly. I've heard a lot about you. I forced a polite smile. I hope only good things. He smirked. Depends on who you ask. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't a random coincidence. William's brother was here. And that meant William was watching. Nathaniel turned to Daphne, his smirk softening into something friendlier. Hey, newbie. Don't worry, I'll make sure you survive your first week. Daphne didn't smile. She just stared at him, wary and cautious. Good girl. She could sense it too. Nathaniel crouched down, meeting Daphne's eyes. By the way, you don't have to be so scared. No one bites here. Daphne tilted her head, studying. Him like he was a puzzle she was trying to solve. Then she spoke quietly. Do you bite? Silence. Nathaniel blinked. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. All right, I like you already. I watched him carefully. There was something off about him. He wasn't just some student helping Daphne adjust. This was intentional. William had placed him here for a reason. And I needed to find out why. As we left the principal's office, Daphne walked slightly ahead, following Nathaniel through the hallways. I felt a presence behind me. Miss Luna. I turned. Nathaniel stood there, his friendly act gone. His smirk was colder now. A word of advice. I raised an eyebrow. I don't need advice. Oh, I think you do. He leaned slightly closer, voice dropping to a whisper. My brother doesn't like unfinished business. My blood ran cold. I forced myself to stay calm. Is that what you are? I asked. His messenger? Nathaniel chuckled. Let's just say, I don't mind cleaning up loose ends. I held his gaze, refusing to back down. Daphne is not a loose end. His eyes flickered toward the little girl ahead, who was still walking, oblivious to our conversation. Oh, I wasn't talking about her. My chest tightened. He wasn't just warning me about Daphne. He was warning me about myself. Nathaniel turned and walked away, leaving me standing there. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my thoughts. William wasn't just watching. He was planning something. And now? He had sent his brother straight into my life. But if they thought I was the same naive woman from before, they were dead wrong. I had been betrayed once. I had been killed once. I would not let it happen again. Sister Luna? Daphne's small voice snapped me out of my thoughts. She had stopped walking and was looking back at me with curious eyes. I smiled. I'm right here. She nodded and reached for my hand. I squeezed it gently, a silent promise in my grip. No matter what William planned, no matter what Nathaniel tried, I would win. This time. For Daphne. And for myself. The moment we stepped outside the school building, I felt it. A presence. A shadow. A warning. Nathaniel's words from earlier still lingered in my mind. My brother doesn't like unfinished business. William was watching. And that meant Isabel wasn't far behind. I glanced at Daphne. She was quiet, walking beside me with a thoughtful expression. She hadn't spoken much since meeting Nathaniel. Are you okay? I asked gently. She nodded, but I could tell she was still processing everything. He's strange, she murmured. I chuckled, though my mind was still tense. That's one way to put it. We reached the car, and my bodyguard, David, opened the door for us. Any unusual activity? I asked him quietly. He shook his head. Nothing yet. But I have a bad feeling. I did too. That evening, I sat in my office, flipping through files when my assistant, Claire, walked in. Miss Luna, someone sent you this. She handed me a small velvet box. I frowned, opening it. Inside was a silver bracelet, delicate, elegant, and painfully familiar. I felt a cold chill creep up my spine. This wasn't just any bracelet. It was the same one William had given me years ago. A note was attached. Some things can't be rewritten. W. My fingers clenched around the paper. He was playing games. He wanted me to remember him. Remember what we used to have. But all I remembered was betrayal. I grabbed the bracelet and tossed it into my drawer. Claire. Yes, Miss Luna? Increase security around the house. And put someone on Nathaniel Kingsley. She nodded and left. I stared at my reflection in the window, my face calm but my heart raging. William wanted me to fear him. But fear? That was a luxury I no longer had. The next morning, I received another call from David. Miss Luna, UN. EED to see this. He sent me a photo. It was a picture of Isabel, standing with the village chief from Shampoo Village. My blood ran cold. She had gone back. She was digging into my past. And if she was meeting with him, she was looking for something. Or someone. I immediately called my assistant. Find out what Isabel is doing in Shampoo Village. On it. As I hung up, my mind raced. What was Isabel trying to uncover? And more importantly, who was helping her? That night, I was in my study when Daphne knocked softly. Sister Luna? Come in. She peeked inside, hesitating. Can I sleep here tonight? Her voice was small. I frowned. Of course. She padded inside, climbing onto the couch. Bad dream? I asked. She shook her head. Just a bad feeling. My heart ached. She was young, but she wasn't naive. She could feel the tension in the air. I walked over, pulling a blanket over her. I won't let anything happen to you, Daphne. She didn't say anything. But she reached for my hand. And I held it. A silent promise. That no matter what Isabel and William planned, they wouldn't win. Not this time. The next morning, a storm was brewing, not in the sky, but in my world. A single call shattered the uneasy peace I had built overnight. Miss Luna, we have a problem. It was David, my head of security. I sat up in bed immediately. What happened? Isabel's not just snooping around Shampoo Village. He hesitated before delivering the real blow. She's looking for Daphne. E's real identity. My blood ran cold. I knew Isabel wasn't stupid. She must have realized that Daphne wasn't just another poor orphan. But for her to actively investigate Daphne's past meant something deeper, something dangerous. I gritted my teeth. Where is Isabel now? Still in Shampoo Village. We tracked her movements. She's been speaking to the old village chief and some of the locals. I clenched my fists. The same village chief who had embezzled Daphne's father's pension. The same villagers who had tried to stop me from taking Daphne away. Something told me that they weren't just selling her a few rumors, they were telling her something real. Something I didn't know yet. David, get my jet ready. We're going to Shampoo Village. The village hadn't changed much. The same narrow dirt roads, the same tiny houses, and the same familiar faces watching me with wary eyes. Only this time, I wasn't here to rescue a little girl. I was here to uncover the truth. Stay close, I told Daphne, holding her hand. She nodded, her big brown eyes scanning the crowd. She was nervous. So was I. It didn't take long to find Isabel. She was in the schoolyard, standing under a tree, speaking with the old village chief. I stepped forward. Isabel. She turned slowly, a mocking smile curving on her lips. Well, well. Look who finally decided to show up. The village chief looked startled to see me. Miss Luna, I cut him off with a sharp glare. What did you tell her? Isabel laughed softly, stepping forward. Relax, sister. I was just catching up with some old friends. Her eyes flicked to Daphne, and my stomach twisted. She knew something. I could see it in her eyes. Tell me, Miss Luna. She tilted her head, pretending to be thoughtful. Did you ever wonder why the villagers didn't want you to take Daphne away? My heart pounded. I had wondered that. I had thought it was greed, that they wanted to keep her as cheap labor. But Isabel's smirk told me it was more than that. What are you trying to say? She smiled. I'm saying that maybe you weren't supposed to take Daphne away. Maybe she wasn't just an orphan. I felt Daphne tense beside me. Isabel. My voice was dangerously low. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Did you ever think that Daphne might be someone's daughter? Everything stopped. The wind. The sounds of children playing. Even my heartbeat. I grabbed Isabel's wrist. Tell me what you can. Oh. She laughed, yanking her hand free. Oh, I'll tell you, sister. She glanced at Daphne again. Then she whispered the words that destroyed my world. Daphne's father wasn't just a policeman. He was an officer investigating a high-profile corruption case. A case that involved a certain company. Your company. I felt the blood drain from my face. What? That's right. Isabel's eyes glittered with amusement. Daphne's father was investigating a corporate fraud case, one Lin. Ked to your business dealings 15 years ago. And the people behind it? She leaned in, whispering softly. They're the same ones who ordered his death. I couldn't breathe. My business? Linked to a corruption case? Daphne's father was killed because of something tied to me? It didn't make sense. I had built my company from the ground up. I had never been involved in anything illegal. Or so I thought. But if Isabel was telling, then someone in my company, or someone who had worked there before, was responsible for Daphne's father's death. And they had hidden it from me. You're lying. Isabel sighed dramatically. Believe what you want. She turned to walk away, then paused. Oh, and Luna? I didn't answer. If I were you, I'd stop looking into it. Her smile was sharp like a blade. You might not like what you find. And then, just like that, she was gone. I turned to Daphne. She was staring at the ground, her DS curled into fists. Daphne. Is it true? Her voice was barely a whisper. I hesitated. Because I didn't know. And that was the worst part. If my company, the company I had spent years building, was connected to her father's death, then I had been protecting the very people who had ruined her life. We'll find out the truth together. She looked up, her eyes filled with confusion and hurt. Promise? I promise. I pulled her into a hug, my heart pounding. Isabel had dropped a bombshell. I had no choice but to pick up the pieces. Because if there was even a chance she was right, then I wasn't just fighting William and Isabel anymore. I was fighting my own past. And I needed to uncover the truth before it destroyed me. The weight of Isabel's words lingered like a curse. Daphne's father wasn't just a policeman. He was investigating a case tied to your company. That sentence kept echoing in my mind, shaking everything I thought I knew. Daphne's small hand gripped mine tightly, as if she was afraid I'd disappear. I wasn't sure if I should be afraid too. Was Isabel telling the truth? Or was she just playing a game? Either way, I couldn't afford to ignore it. I needed answers. Back in City A, I wasted no time. As soon as we landed, I called Claire, my most trusted assistant. Find every record related to corruption cases from 15 years ago, any link to my company, no matter how small. Claire hesitated. Miss Luna, are you sure? I understood her concern. This wasn't just about a name in a file. If my company was involved in a police investigation, that meant one thing. Someone had deliberately erased that past. And whoever it was, they wouldn't want me digging it up. Do it, I said firmly. She nodded. I'll start searching now. I hung up and turned to Daphne. She sat on the couch, hugging her knees, staring at the city lights outside the window. Daphne? She looked up, her eyes filled with questions. Do you think my father was murdered? I had no idea what to say. I didn't want to lie to her. But I also didn't want to give her false hope. We're going to find out the truth. Her fingers tightened around the fabric of her dress. And what if you don't like what you find? I exhaled slowly. Then I'll deal with it. No matter what. Daphne studied me for a moment, then nodded. She trusted me. And I couldn't let her down. 2 days later, Claire walked into my office, a file in her hands and worry in her eyes. She placed the folder on my desk. You need to see this. I opened it, and my heart nearly stopped. At the top of the police report, there was a name. Deceased, Officer Ethan Warren. Warren. Daphne's father. The case file said he had died in an ambush while investigating a corporate fraud ring. I skimmed the report until a certain detail jumped out at me. Officer Warren had been investigating a company under the former CEO. Mr. Winston Sullivan. Winston Sullivan. The man who used to own my company before I took over. Winston Sullivan. A name I had buried in my memory. He had once been one of the most powerful businessmen in the city, but he disappeared overnight after I bought the company. At the time, I had thought it was just a failed business deal. But now, it seemed like Winston hadn't just run away. He had erased himself from history. And my company had been his cover. I picked up my phone and dialed Claire. Where is Winston Sullivan now? She hesitated. No one knows, Miss Luna. It's like he vanished off the face of the earth. I exhaled. If Winston had really fled, then it meant only one thing. He was running from something. Or someone. Keep digging, I ordered. I hung up and stared at the file. If Daphne's father had been investigating a corruption case linked to Winston, then maybe Winston had been involved in his murder. But that didn't explain why the villagers wanted to keep Daphne hidden. Unless Daphne wasn't just a victim's daughter. She was the key to something much bigger. Just as I was about to close the file, my phone buzzed. Unknown caller. I picked up. A familiar voice greeted me. Luna, dear. Isabel. I gritted my teeth. What do you want? Oh, don't be so cold. I just wanted to check in. Have you found out the truth yet? I clenched my jaw. Why do you care? She laughed softly. Because, sister, you're playing with fire. My grip tightened on the phone. And what does that mean? Isabel sighed dramatically. It means you should stop poking your nose where it doesn't belong. I stayed silent. She continued, her voice mocking. Do you really think you're ready to handle the truth? I could hear the smirk in her tone. Because let me tell you a little secret, Luna. The man who killed Daphne's father? He's much closer than you think. A sharp, piercing cold shot through my veins. What do you mean? Isabel laughed again, but this time there was something sinister behind it. You'll see soon enough. And then the line went dead. I stood there, the phone still in my hand. Daphne watched me carefully. Sister Luna? I forced myself to breathe. We need to move fast. Winston Sullivan. The fraud case. The murder of Daphne's father. And now, Isabel's cryptic warning. He's much closer than you think. I had a sickening feeling that the past wasn't just buried. It was waiting in the shadows. And I was about to uncover something no one wanted me to find. The moment Isabel hung up, a cold chill crept through my body. The man who killed Daphne's father? He's much closer than you think. Her voice still echoed in my head. What did she mean? Who was I missing? Who was the real enemy? Daphne was watching me carefully from across the room. She was smart enough to know that something was wrong. Sister Luna, is something bad going to happen? I walked over and gently squeezed her small hand. No, I promised. Nothing is going to happen to you. But deep down, I wasn't sure if I was telling her the truth. I didn't waste time. That night, I dove deep into Winston Sullivan's past. His records were almost completely wiped, but I still had one last card to play. I called an old contact, Eric Carter. A private investigator. He was the kind of man who could find dirt on anyone. Luna, Eric's voice was smooth as ever. It's been a long time. I need you to find someone. Who? Winston Sullivan. There was a long pause. Then a low whistle. That's a name I haven't heard in years. Can you find him? For you? Always. Eric was confident, but I wasn't. Winston had been off the grid for years. If he was alive, he was hiding for a reason. And I was about to flush him out. While Eric searched for Winston, I went after the only other person who might know something. Daphne's mother. She had died shortly after her husband, but something about her death never sat right with me. According to old records, she had committed suicide. But was it really suicide? Or was someone silencing her? I found her grave in an old cemetery on the outskirts of town. It was forgotten, overgrown with weeds. Daphne stood beside me, clutching my hand. Her small fingers trembled. She's really gone, she whispered. I bent down, brushing the dust from the headstone. We'll find out what happened to her. As I stood, a strange feeling crept up my spine. We weren't alone. Someone was watching us. I could feel it. The hairs on my arms stood on end. Daphne, I said quietly, get in the car. She looked at me, confused. Now. She obeyed, quickly climbing into the back seat. I turned, scanning the empty graveyard. Then I saw it. A dark figure, standing beneath an old tree. Watching. Waiting. Who's there? I called out. The figure didn't move. A sudden gust of wind sent chills through the air. Then, slowly, the figure turned and walked away, vanishing into the inn. That night, Eric called me back. Luna. I found something. I sat up in bed. Tell me. Winston Sullivan. He's alive. My breath hitched. Where is he? Eric hesitated. That's the problem. He's in a hospital. I frowned. What? Yeah. Some small private hospital outside the city. Apparently, he's been in a coma for the past 10 years. My stomach dropped. A coma? Yeah. Whatever happened to him, someone wanted him gone, but they didn't kill him. Something wasn't adding up. Who kept him alive all these years? And why? I need to see him, I said. Eric sighed. I had a feeling you'd say that. The next morning, I drove straight to the hospital. It was a quiet, private facility, tucked away in the hills. The kind of place where people disappeared. I walked through the halls, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. When I reached Winston's room, I hesitated. Then I pushed the door open. And there he was. Winston Sullivan. The man I had been searching for. Lying in a hospital bed. Motionless. Silent. But alive. He's been like this for years, the nurse whispered. No visitors. No records. It's like he doesn't exist. I stared at his still face. The man who had once controlled my company. The man who had been investigated by Daphne's father. What secrets was he hiding? I turned to leave. Then, suddenly, a hand grabbed my wrist. My breath caught Winston's hand. I spun around. His eyes were open. His lips moved. And then, he whispered a single name. William. My blood turned to ice. William? My William? I stumbled back, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. What did you say? But Winston's eyes had already closed again. He had slipped back into unconsciousness. I ran out of the room, my mind racing. William. The man I had once loved. The man I had trusted with everything. The man who had stood beside Isabel on the night of my death. Was he the real killer? Had he orchestrated the murder of Daphne's father? Had he been pulling the strings this entire time? I suddenly felt sick. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about justice. For Daphne. For her father. For everything I had lost. I pulled out my phone and dialed Claire. Find everything on William. Everything? Everything. Because if Winston Sullivan was right, then the real enemy had been standing beside me all along. And this time, I wasn't going to let him win. The name that changed everything. William. Winston Sullivan's whispered name had shattered everything I thought I knew. I stood frozen in the hallway of the private hospital, my mind racing. William? My William? The man who had once played the piano for me, who had shared my bed and dreams, the man I had trusted. Had he been involved from the beginning? Was he the one who had orchestrated the murder of Daphne's father? A nauseating chill ran through me. I had spent so much time looking in the wrong direction, searching for enemies in the shadows, when the real one had been standing in the light all along. I pulled out my phone and dialed Claire. She picked up immediately. Miss Luna, I was just about to call you. Did you find anything on William? There was a short pause. Then, Claire's voice dropped. Luna, you need to see this. A sense of dread settled in my stomach. Where are you? At the office. But I think you should come alone. I drove straight to my company. Inside, Claire was waiting for me, looking tense. On my desk, a thick folder was open. She gestured to it. You asked for everything on William. Well, I found something that doesn't make sense. I stepped forward and glanced at the papers. And then I saw it. A financial transfer. A name signed on a confidential report. And beneath it, a police case file dated 15 years ago. A case about a corporate fraud ring. A case led by Officer Ethan Warren, Daphne's father. A case that had been sabotaged from the inside. And the man who helped cover it up? William Harrington. My hands trembled. No, that's not possible. Claire swallowed hard. I double-checked everything. It's him, Luna. William was involved in the case your company was investigated for. He worked with Winston Sullivan. A sharp, piercing pain spread through my chest. I had loved this man. I had stood beside him. I had died in front of him. And this whole time, he had been my enemy. My fawn. Buzzed. I picked it up without thinking. Unknown caller. I already knew who it was. Luna, dear, Isabel's voice purred through the speaker. I see you've been busy. I gritted my teeth. You knew. She laughed softly. Of course I knew. I just wanted you to find out the truth for yourself. It's more fun that way, isn't it? My fingers tightened around the phone. Why are you calling me? Because, sister, I have a little surprise for you. Her tone was light, but I knew her games too well. What are you talking about? There was a pause. Then she whispered, turn on the news. A chill shot down my spine. I grabbed the remote, turned on the TV. And the moment the screen lit up, my world collapsed. Breaking news, a shocking scandal. This just in, a major corporate fraud ring has been uncovered, linking former businessman Winston Sullivan to financial crimes spanning over a decade. But the real shock comes from the involvement of an internationally recognized pianist, William Harrington. The screen switched to a video of William exiting a building surrounded by reporters. The anchor continued. William Harrington, known for his rise to fame in the music world, was revealed to have deep financial connections to Sullivan Industries, the same company at the center of a corruption case 15 years ago. Reports also suggest his involvement in the mysterious death of a police officer at the time. The footage zoomed in. William's face was pale, his expression unreadable. Then, a reporter shouted, Mr. Harrington, what do you say to the allegations that you helped cover up the murder of Officer Ethan Warren? William flinched. And for the first time, I saw it. Guilt. Raw, undeniable guilt. The camera zoomed closer. William's lips parted slightly, and he muttered something. The microphone barely caught it. I didn't mean for it to happen. The world spun around me. He admitted it. William was guilty. I could barely breathe. Daphne's father was dead because of him. And all these years, he had looked me in the eye, held my hand, shared my bed. With this secret buried deep inside him. Enjoying the show? Isabel's voice snapped me back to reality. My grip tightened on the phone. Why are you doing this? I hissed. Because, sister, you took everything from me. Her voice turned colder. You had it all. The power. The money. The love. And now? Now, I get to watch you break. She hung up. I stood there, my body shaking. Daphne sat on the couch, staring at the screen. Silent. Unmoving. Then, very softly, she asked, "Sister Luna, was he the one?" My throat tightened. I looked at her, this child I had sworn to protect. This child whose father had been stolen from her. The child whose life had been built on a lie. I walked over, knelt down, and took her hands in mine. I met her wide, teary eyes and whispered, "Yes, Daphne. He was the one." Her tiny fingers curled into fists. "Then I want justice." I nodded. Because so did I. I wouldn't stop until William paid for everything he had done. A reckoning long overdue. Daphne's words echoed in my mind. Then I want justice. There was no hesitation in her voice. No fear. She deserved justice. I had spent too many years blind, believing in people who only wanted to destroy me. Not anymore. William had hidden in the comfort of my trust for years. But now? I was going to rip that trust away and watch him fall apart. Claire wasted no time. She arranged a private meeting between me and William. No press. No cameras. Just us. "Are you sure about this?" she asked as we drove to the location. "I need to look him in the eyes," I said. "I need to hear him say it." William thought he could escape the past. But I was here to bring it back to him. The meeting place was a dimly lit hotel suite, far from prying eyes. When I walked in, William was already there. His once perfectly styled hair was a mess. His sharp suits, now wrinkled and unkempt. For the first time, he looked small. Weak. Like a man whose world was caving in. "Luna," he breathed, standing from his chair. I didn't move. I didn't blink. "Sit down." My voice was cold. A command, not a request. For a moment, he hesitated. Then, slowly, he sank back into his seat. "You know why I'm here, don't you?" I asked. He swallowed hard. "Luna, Don't say my name." He flinched. "Good." I pulled out the files Claire gave me. "This is everything, William." I tossed them onto the table. The pages spilled out like shattered glass. All of his secrets laid bare. William's fingers twitched, but he didn't touch them. "Tell me the truth." My voice was steady. Unyielding. "Did you kill Daphne's father?" His eyes darkened. Then he exhaled, rubbing his temples. "I never meant for it to happen," he muttered. "I didn't ask what you meant." I leaned forward. "I asked what you did." A long silence stretched between us. Then, finally, he looked up. "Yes," he whispered. My chest tightened. Even though I already knew the answer, hearing it from his lips still burned. "He was investigating Sullivan Industries," William continued, voice shaking. "He was getting too close." "So you killed him?" "No. It wasn't supposed to be like that." His voice cracked. "We just wanted to scare him, make him drop the case. But things got out of hand." I closed my eyes. So that was it. A man was murdered because he was doing the right thing. Because he wanted to protect his family. And the man who took his life had been by my side for years. I stood up. "You're a coward, William." His head snapped up. "Luna. You spent years lying to me. You stood next to Isabel, plotting against me. And now? You're still making excuses. His eyes flashed with pain. I loved you. I laughed bitterly. No. You loved what I could give you. William had never loved me. He had loved power, control, wealth. And he had been willing to kill for it. I'm turning you in. His face went pale. Luna, please. You thin. Kay, you deserve mercy? I snapped. Tell me, William. Did you give Daphne's father mercy? His silence was all the answer I needed. I turned to leave. As I reached the door, he spoke one last time. Luna, do you still hate me? I paused. Then, softly, I said, no. I don't hate you, William. I just don't care anymore. And with that, I walked out. For good. As I stepped into the hallway, I pulled out my phone. I dialed the police. Detective Carter? Yes. I have a confession you'll want to hear. N. D. Just like that, William's world was officially over. William thought he had years to hide his crimes. But in the end, it only took a single night to destroy him. The morning after our meeting, the police stormed his apartment. News cameras flashed, journalists shouted, and William, once a man of elegance and pride, was dragged out in handcuffs. He didn't fight it. Didn't scream. He just looked at me, standing across the street. And for the first time, his eyes were empty. Luna, he mouthed, but no sound came out. I didn't react. He had already gotten more of my time than he deserved. The officers shoved him into the back of a police car. The doors slammed shut. And just like that, he was gone. By noon, William's name was everywhere. TV reports, online articles, social media. Renowned pianist William Harrington arrested in connection to 15-year-old murder case. People were shocked. The world had always seen him as a gentleman, an artist, a man of class. No one could believe that he had blood on his hands. But I wasn't surprised. Men like William always thought they could rewrite history. That they could bury the past. But the past always claws its way back up. And now? The world would know the truth. That night, I sat with Daphne in the living room. The news kept replaying William's arrest, but she wasn't watching the screen. Her hands were clenched in her lap. Her face was pale. Then, very softly, she spoke. He was the reason my dad ever came home. A lump formed in my throat. Yes, I whispered. He was. She didn't cry. Not right away. Instead, she exhaled slowly, then said something that shattered me. Sister Luna, would my dad be proud of me? I reached forward and took her hand. Daphne, your father would be the proudest man in the world. Finally, her tears fell. I held her as she cried, letting her grieve for the father she had never truly known. But beneath her sadness, I saw something else. Determination. This wasn't just about her father's justice anymore. Daphne was changing. Growing. And I had no doubt. She would become a force no one could stop. While William rotted in a cold interrogation room, Isabel was panicking. She called me twice. I didn't answer. Then she sent a message. Meet me. One last time. Let's settle this. I stared at the text. Was this another trap? Or was she finally ready to face me? Either way, I was done running from her. I replied. Name the place. The next night, I met Isabel at an abandoned warehouse. She was waiting inside, leaning against a rusted table, her arms crossed. Her face was thinner than before. Her once perfect posture had wilted. Look at you, I said. Not so confident anymore, are you? She laughed bitterly. You think you've won, Luna? Haven't I? Her jaw clenched. Then she whispered something I almost didn't hear. You were never supposed to live this long. My blood ran cold. What did you just say? She smirked. The accident. Luna. The one that was supposed to kill you. It wasn't just William's plan. It was mine, too. I stared at her. For years, I had blamed William. But now I knew. Isabel had been there all along. Why? I demanded. Why did you do it? She rolled her eyes. Oh, please. Don't act surprised. You took me out of that village, raised me like I was your little sister. Her voice twisted into a snarl. But you never saw me as your equal. I felt my breath catch. That's not true. It is true. She snapped. You had everything, Luna. You ran a company, controlled millions, and treated me like a little charity project. I was stunned. Had that been what she thought this entire time? That my love had been fake? That I had never truly cared? I shook my head. You were my family, Isabel. No, she whispered, eyes burning. I was your shadow. I took a step forward. It's over, Isabel. You don't get to decide that. She reached into her coat. For a split second, I thought she was pulling out a gun. But then, she threw a folder onto the table. Read it. I picked it up. Flipped through the pages. And my heart stopped. Inside the folder were documents. Contracts. Financial transfers. And a name I never expected. Daphne. My hands shook. What is this? Isabel smirked. Just a little something I prepared in case you got too comfortable. The documents showed falsified records. Fake business deals under Daphne's name. If any. It would look like Daphne was stealing from me. Like she had been planning this from the start. Like she was just another Isabel. My fingers tightened around the pages. Isabel leaned in. Turn me in, and I'll make sure Daphne gets dragged down, too. My stomach twisted. Isabel had nothing left to lose. And that made her the most dangerous kind of person. I had destroyed her life. Now, she wanted to destroy mine. Your choice, sister. Me or her? The impossible choice. I stood there, my fin. Jares trembling over the damning documents, my mind racing. Isabel had backed me into a corner. Turn me in, and Daphne falls with me, she repeated, smirking. Or, you let me walk away, and she stays clean. The way she said her name, as if Daphne was nothing more than a pawn in her sick game, made my blood boil. You're despicable. No, Luna. Her voice turned cold. I'm just playing the game you started. For a moment, silence filled the room. A war of stares, words unspoken, threats exchanged. Get through our locked gazes. And then, I laughed. Do you really think I'd fall for this? I threw the documents onto the table. What do you mean? Isabel, I know you better than you know yourself, asterisk 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 asterisk. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. If you really had proof that Daphne was involved, you wouldn't be blackmailing me. You'd have already released it. Luna, I swear. No. You don't get to swear anymore. The color in her face drained. She knew I was right. Her hands clenched into tight fists. You're bluffing. I smiled. Am I? I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. What are you doing? She snapped. I dialed a number. The ringing felt endless. Then, a voice answered. Detective Carter? Luna? What's the update? I looked straight at Isabel. I have another confession to report. Her eyes widened. She lunged toward me. But before she could touch me, the door burst open. 2 officers rushed in, guns drawn. Isabel Langley, you are under arrest. She froze. A second later, she spun toward me, eyes wild with rage. You set me up. No, Isabel. You set yourself up. One of the officers grabbed her arm. You have the right to remain silent. Shut up. Isabel screamed, thrashing against their hold. She turned back to me. You think this is over? She shrieked. You think you've won? I walked up to her, lowering my voice. You lost the moment you betrayed me. Her face twisted in fury, but there was nothing she could do. The officers dragged her away. I watched without a trace of sympathy. She had spent her whole life pretending to be something she wasn't. Now, she'd have to face who she truly was. That night, I sat on the couch watching the news. Isabel's arrest was everywhere. Isabel Langley, former rising star of Sullivan Industries, was arrested today on multiple charges, including fraud and attempted murder. I heard soft footsteps behind me. Daphne stood there, her eyes filled with uncertainty. Isabel's gone? I nodded. She exhaled slowly. Then, she walked over and sat beside me. Neither of us spoke. Just the quiet hum of the TV, the flickering light against the walls. Then, Sister, are you tired? I turned to look at her. A little. She smiled, leaning her head against my shoulder. Then rest. I'll take care of things now. I felt something warm in my chest. She wasn't a scared little girl anymore. She was ready to fight her own battles. And this time, I knew she would win. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. Daphne was in the kitchen, flipping through some legal books. She looked so different from the fragile girl I had found in that village. She was strong. She was determined. And as I sipped my coffee, I realized this wasn't the end of our story. It was just the beginning. The aftermath of betrayal. The morning after Isabel's arrest, I expected to wake up feeling relieved. But I didn't. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with memories. Everything had happened so fast. William arrested. Isabel exposed. Daphne finally free. So why did it feel like something was still missing? Then, my phone buzzed. A message from Detective Carter. We need to talk. There's something you should see. I arrived at the police station, my heels clicking again. Say the cold tile floor. Detective Carter was waiting in his office, his face grim. "What's going on?" I asked. He handed me a manila folder. I flipped it open. And what I saw made my blood freeze. A signed confession. William had finally talked. "It wasn't just Isabel," Carter said. "There was someone else behind all of this." I looked up. "Who?" He hesitated before saying the name. And when he did, everything fell into place. For 15 years, I had believed that William and Isabel were the on-ly traitors in my life. But I had been wrong. Daniel. I whispered the name like a curse. Teacher Daniel. The very same man who had recommended Isabel for sponsorship. The same man who had stood by, watching Daphne suffer. The man who had handpicked the perfect pawn to infiltrate my life. He was involved from the very beginning, Carter confirmed. And we finally have enough evidence to bring him in. I clenched my fists. Then let's finish this. I hadn't planned to go back to Shampoo Village. But when I did, I realized it had changed. The roads were smoother. The school had new buildings. People whispered when they saw me, but this time, there was no fear. Only respect. "Miss Luna?" I turned. It was Daphne's old teacher, one of the few decent people in that place. "You're here for Daniel, aren't you?" I nodded. She sighed. "We all knew he was corrupt. We just never thought he'd go this far." I thought back to the day I first met Daphne. The way she had been forced to give up her coat. The way Isabel had been handed my sponsorship without question. I had been blind for too long. "Where is he?" "At his house." "Not for long." Daniel opened the door, and for a moment, he froze. "Miss Luna," he said smoothly, forcing a smile. "What a surprise." "Save it," I snapped. "I know everything." His smile faltered. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Behind me, the police stepped forward. Daniel stiffened. "Daniel, you are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and child exploitation." Before they could finish, he lunged at me. "You ruined everything," he screamed. I didn't even flinch. This time, I was ready. A police officer tackled him to the ground. Daniel thrashed, but it was pointless. "This was never your game to win," I whispered as he was dragged away. His screams echoed through the village. But I didn't stop to listen. I had more important things to do. By the time I returned to City A, Daphne was waiting for me. She was dressed in a sleek black blazer, a stack of legal books beside her. "You did it," she said softly. I nodded. "We did it." She smiled, but there was something else in her eyes. Determination. Purpose. The fire of someone who had finally found their calling. "Sister," she said, straightening. "I have something to tell you." I raised a brow. "Go on." She took a deep breath. "I got accepted into the top law firm in the city. As a junior legal assistant. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then, I laughed. "UN. Ever stop surprising me, do you?" "I learned from the best," she teased. We stood there for a moment, two survivors of a battle neither of us had asked for. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free. That night, we celebrated. Not with fancy parties or extravagant events. Just the two of us, sitting on the balcony, watching the city lights. You're going to change the world, you know, I told her. She smiled. So are you. I looked up at the stars. 15 years ago, I had chosen to sponsor a little girl from a forgotten village. And today? That little girl had grown into a warrior. Someone who would stand up for justice. For herself. For others. And as I took a deep breath, I realized. This was only the beginning. A final chapter, a new beginning. The past 15 years had been a war, a relentless battle against deception, betrayal, and heartbreak. But today, it was over. The enemies were gone. The wounds had healed. And the future? For the first time, it was ours to create. I sat in my office, staring at the city skyline. Everything had changed. William was behind bars. Isabel had disappeared into the justice system. Daniel's crimes had been exposed to the world. And yet, a strange sense of emptiness lingered. Not sadness. Not regret. Just a quiet kind of peace. General Manager Luna, your assistant is here. I turned. Daphne walked in, her presence strong, confident. She wasn't the scared little girl I had on. CE rescued from that village. She was a woman ready to take on the world. She placed a folder on my desk. The official documents. Your name has been cleared of any ties to Isabel and William's financial crimes. Your reputation is fully restored. I smiled. I never doubted it. Of course not. She smirked. The same playful expression she had as a child. The same expression I had grown to love like family. And in that moment, I realized. She wasn't just my responsibility anymore. She was my equal. Later that evening, we walked through the park. The air was crisp, the city alive with the sounds of laughter and movement. I have something to tell you, Daphne said suddenly. I raised a brow. I got an offer. I stopped walking. An offer? A position in London. My heart clenched. London. Half a world away. I swallowed. Are you going to take it? She hesitated, then nodded. I think so. A long silence stretched between us. 15 years. 15 years of raising her, protecting her, teaching her everything I knew. And now? She was ready to fly. I smiled, though my chest ached. Then you have to go. Her eyes widened. You're not going to try and stop me? I shook my head. No, Daphne. Because I didn't save you so you'd stay by my side forever. I saved you so you could stand on your own. She sniffled and threw her arms around me. I'm going to miss you, sister. I hugged her back. You'll always have a home here. No matter where you go. She nodded against my shoulder. And you'll come visit me, right? Only if you promise not to cry when I do. She laughed through her tears. And just like that, I let her go. A week later, I stood at the airport, watching Daphne disappear past security. She didn't look back. Not because she wasn't sad. But because she knew she didn't have to. Because no matter where she went, we would always be family. As I walked back to my car, I realized something. For so long, my life had been about protecting her. But now, for the first time, it was time to start living for myself. That evening, I stood in my office, looking at the city lights. The phone rang. I answered. Julian? Dinner? I hesitated. Then, I smiled. Sure. For the first time in a long time. The future was mine. And I was ready.